done.
And now I will invite our guests on stage to unveil the book. Sanjoy, will you come and join us? Sanjoy Roy, Managing Director of Teamwork Arts.
Is this okay? Is this audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi everyone, thanks for being here and welcome to this session about a book that all of us here are really enthusiastic about, as you can tell, and also about a decade in Hindi cinema that is very important to all of us in different ways. Now, of course, I think that that trailer that you saw did most of the work for me in terms of refreshing your memories of the decade. But again, just to quickly run by it, when the 1970s began, in the mainstream, Hindi cinema was smack dab in the middle of the Rajesh Khanna moment. The 3 years of really intense superstardom for a romantic superstar. And then, of course, that gave way to the era of the angry young man and the worlds created by mainstream filmmakers like Manmohan Desai, Prakash Mehra, Yash Chopra, and so on. And of course, there was also what we call the art cinema or the parallel cinema, spearheaded by Shyam Benegal in particular, which also had its own parallel star system almost, as it came to be known later with Shabana Azmi, Nasiruddin Shah, Smita Patel, and so on. And there was the middle cinema with Rishikesh Mukherjee, Basu Chatterjee, Gulzar Saab. There was a lot going on in that decade. And what I'd like our panelists here to do is to just talk a little bit about what that decade meant to them. So, Nirupama, since you have co-edited this book with Shantanu Ray Chaudhuri, who couldn't be here at the festival, I just wanted to get an idea of what the 70s meant to you personally and why you think it's such an important time for Hindi cinema and why a book like this had to be done.
Oh, thanks, Jay, and first of all, thanks to JLF and Sanjoy for this lovely opportunity. So, as you know, Jay, I had been working formally also for films, promoting cinema when I was in Ministry of Information Broadcasting. But films has always been a passion, and I think what unites the three of us, besides our passion for cinema, obviously, is that we belong to Generation X, as the Americans call us, and our experience of watching films has been, I feel, very, very different from what the next Gen Y and now Gen Z, how they experience films. So we had a chat. I mean, I spoke to Vishal also about it, and a lot other people who are in the industry. As you know, Sriram Raghavan has contributed to the book, and Varun Grover, and Ketan Mehta, Subhash Ghai, Mohan Agashe, and of course a lot of professional film writers like yourself, a lot of National Film Award winners. So we wanted to collect all these perspectives about how we viewed films on single screens, you know, how films at that time was possibly the only mode of entertainment available to all of us, and we consumed cinema, or rather were consumed by cinema to a great extent. I mean, I may refer to your essay, for instance, the kind of impact that a dialogue of Amitabh Bachchan written by Salim Javed has. It's deeply ingrained in our psyche. It's very difficult to forget it. The kind of villains you had, you know, starting from Ajit to all of them, Pran Saab and Prem Chopra, everything, the music, the stars, obviously, and like you said, then the parallel cinema stars. I mean, Smita Patil came, set the screen ablaze, so did Shabana, Nasir, Om Puri, Amrish Puri, all the brilliant people from FTII, NSD, they found a space. And then you have this another amazing kind of cinema, middle of the road, with brilliant filmmakers, many of them from the Bimal Roy school, like Rishikesh Mukherjee, who was an editor and assisted Bimal Roy, and Gulzar Saab, and Basu Chatterjee, who did some of his best work in the 70s. So we thought, Shantanu and I, that it's very important for us to archive this period. Of course, archiving is a formal process as well, but a lot of the art and craft of how these films were made, what they meant, and what it meant to the people who made these films at that time, why it is important. So, and one of the first people I discussed the book with was Syed Mirza Saab, who I knew when he was FTI chair, and he was very happy. He said, you've chosen such an interesting decade because 70s to beginning 80s was such an exciting period. And all of us coexisted, and all films were there, and there was space, and audience was welcoming of these films. Also, something Varun Grover said in his essay, he said there's a German word called Sehnsucht, which is a yearning or a longing for something which is not there, and we just can't put our finger on it, but there's this deep yearning in all of us, and we really yearn for that kind of cinema, and that's why we keep going back to these films. Whenever we get a chance, we watch reruns. You do it, I do it, I'm sure Vishalji does it too. Whenever on, you know, one of the channels there's a rerun, I would happily watch a 70s film anytime. So that's how the book came about, and I got a lot of people from the industry also to share their perspective, and I think it'll be interesting not just to students who research cinema, but the lay reader who wants to experience that decade, because I think it was a very prolific period for all the directors who did the best work at that time.
Yeah, you know, as you suggested in what you said there, there's such a wide range covered in the book. And one thing I'd like to tell you, you know, those of you, when you get your hands on the book, one of the first things you can do to get a sense of the range is to read Sriram Raghavan's essay and then read Rajat Kapoor's essay. Because you have two completely different sensibilities there. You have Sriram Raghavan talking about his love for pulp cinema, for genre, for mainstream films, some of which are not seen as very reputable. They're seen as a bit disreputable. And then you have Rajat Kapoor talking about Money Calls Duvidha, and he makes the case that, you know, why are films like these seen as boring or outside the norm? They should be embraced the same way. But I'd like to come to Vishalji now. You know, we've been watching your films for over 20 years now, your work as a writer, director, music director. One thing I was interested in knowing, apart from your feelings about the 70s as a decade, 1970s Hindi cinema, is there any way in which you've been influenced as a filmmaker by any of the 1970s films, either the mainstream films or the so-called art films or the middle cinema, has that has that worked its way into your own filmmaking style?
Yeah, yeah, of course, absolutely, 100%. Because I am 1965 born, so in 1970 they were the forming years of my creativity, and they were only source of entertainment available. And my father was in a government service, so his job was transferable. So we used to be in small cities like Najibabad, then Bijnor, and then Meerut. So going to theater was like a whole ceremony, and the impression those films had on my still I'm so influenced by. I mean, we all grew up on Amar Akbar Anthony and films like that. Then Guldar Saab cinema, in of those days, Mere Apne, Sholay, Mere Apne, I remember, the dialogues became so famous at that time. And the main thing, and now it is a little less. But in those days, the film dialogues used to become like the super hit, I remember when Sholay became, major hit. In fact, when Sholay was released, the first 2 weeks it was called a flop. And slowly, after 2 weeks, people realized that, what a film that is. And then it became, what Sholay is. So Sholay का पूरा एक dialogue का एक long play record release हुआ था. So before that, I remember Guldar Saab's that मेरे अपने. So उसमें विनोद खन्ना एंड शत्रुघ्न सिन्हा दोनों की पहली फिल्म थी. So उसमें I remember as a child, I still remember those lines कि शाम आए तो कहना कि छेनू आए तो बदन में ज़्यादा गर्मी है तो बेशक आके निकाल ले, मेरे किसी लड़के को हाथ लगाए तो मोहल्ले के जला कर राख कर दूंगा. So do we, and now if you see Guldar Saab, do you remember, can we कि घासलेट बेटा घासलेट मिट्टी का तेल अभी भी समझ में नहीं आया तो आग लगा के दिखाऊं. These kind of like one-liners. वैसे भी हम, we all Indians, we love one-liners. In even our normal day-to-day life, we look for it, thing to give a punchline in our family life. And so I'm totally a person from 70s. Then I remember Guldar Saab's, I think that song was Kinara. एक ही ख्वाब कई बार देखा है मैंने, तूने साड़ी में उरस ली हैं मेरी चाबियां घर की. और वो धर्मेंद्र के ऊपर पिक्चराइज हुआ था और गेस्ट थे वो उसमें, और भूपी जी ने गाना गाया था. वो गाना मैं आज तक भुला ही नहीं पाता हूँ, क्योंकि उसमें इतना लाइक ए हस्बैंड वाइफ, दे आर ही सिंगिंग एंड लाइक ए वेरी नॉर्मल कि एक ही ख्वाब कई बार देखा है मैंने, एक ही ख्वाब कई बार देखा है मैंने, तूने साड़ी में उड़स ली हैं मेरी चाबियां घर की. ताश के पत्तों पे लड़ती है कभी खेल में मुझसे, ताश के पत्तों पे लड़ती है कभी खेल में मुझसे, और कभी लड़ती भी ऐसे है कि बस खेल रही हो. सो पूरा वो इतना खूबसूरत. देन आंधी, तेरे बिना ज़िंदगी से कोई शिकवा तो नहीं, वो जब हम जवान हुए तो, और आज तक यही गाना रोमांस में यही गाना नॉस्टैल्जिया में चलता है कि तेरे बिना ज़िंदगी से कोई शिकवा तो नहीं, तेरे बिना ज़िंदगी भी लेकिन ज़िंदगी तो नहीं. ये 70s का जो असर था, आई विल बी वेरी ऑनेस्ट, मेरी वो उम्र पैरेलल सिनेमा देखने की नहीं थी, बिकॉज वी वर ऑल ऑब्सेस्ड विद मेन स्ट्रीम कमर्शियल सिनेमा. एंड वो भी अमर अकबर एंथनी वगैरह इतनी खूबसूरत मज़ेदार फिल्में थी. So I'm totally then 80s, because at that time I was I in 84 I became a teenager, but at that time I think our cinema started going down. Till 70s we were very even early 80s. I think Qarz was early, must be early 80s. 80, yeah. Qarz was early 80. And Kabhi Kabhi was 70s, I remember. The music of Kabhi Kabhi, the whole nation used to sing, मैं पल दो पल का शायर हूँ, या कभी कभी मेरे दिल में ख्याल आता है. आज आप वो फिल्म देखें तो मे बी आपको उसमें डेटेड चीज़ें नज़र आ सकती हैं, मगर द होल नेशन यूज टू बी लाइक साहिर लुधियानवी ने पूरा देश लूट लिया था अपनी पोइट्री से, और ऐसा भर के रसदार फिल्में बना करती थी. तो 70s 80s में फिर यू नो देन व्हेन दीज साउथ इंडियन फिल्म्स हिम्मत वाला और वो सब, तो म्यूज़िक भी पूरा एकदम डाउन जाने लगा. आई थिंक आई एम स्पीकिंग अ लॉट, वी हैव वेरी लेस टाइम.
No, this is all fascinating, and Nirupama, I know you're such a big fan of the music of that era. We could say, if we had enough time for it, you could sing Rim Gire Savan, which seems like an appropriate
I think she should
song
sing.
for
She
this.
sings really well.
But if you could just tell us something about your feelings about the music of that time, and also whatever decline happened, if it happened in the 1980s.
So, Vishal ji and I are big music buffs, and I think R.D. Burman Bhakts, if I may say so. So, I think that was such an exciting time because S.D. Burman and all the older music directors were kind of slowly retiring, and R.D. Burman came into his own, and I think what an amazing range he has. If you remember from Amar Prem, which is when his father finally said, I'm proud to be called his father now. For the first time, I think S.D. Burman acknowledged it, and the lyricists, Anand Bakshi, R.D. Burman made a superb team for Shakti Samanta, and then R.D. Burman continued with Majroo Sultanpuri, who used to write for S.D. Burman, as you know, all the romantic, great songs. So they did all the Nasir Hussain films, for instance, and Sahir Ludhianvi was still around. He wrote some films with Khayyam. Jaidev started coming into his own. Rajesh Roshan came with, Kala Patthar was Rajesh Roshan and Sahir. And you also had Vanraj Bhatia came up. He was a brilliant music director. He did all the Shyam Benegal films, if you remember, Junoon and Bhumika and others, and Vasant Dev came up as a lyricist. You also had a very productive period for Lakshmikant Pyarelal, who was doing all these great Manoj Kumar films. We were discussing the music, I remember, because both of us loved that music, and you had this lyricist called Santosh Anand who wrote all the songs for Manoj Kumar films. So such a great variety of music. I think it was absolutely a very, very rich decade in terms of that kind of variety. And as we know, S.D. Burman and R.D. both were very fond of Kishore Kumar. So Kishore Kumar really dominated 70s. In fact, I think Naushad Saab has said it somewhere very disparagingly that was just R.D. and Kishore. But I beg to differ with Naushad Saab, although he's such a great music director. I think in terms of the soundtracks, whether you take Sholay or Shalimar, R.D. Burman is unmatched. To date, you know how popular he is. Everybody keeps remixing R.D. Burman. And that was his peak. The decade belonged to him. Absolutely. So, Vishalji, would you like to add something? Because I know we are also fond of
And Manoj Kumar, his films were so, socially such relevant. You want to talk to about Manoj Kumar. या बाकी जो कुछ बचा तो महंगाई मार गई, या शोर में वो एक ज़रा सा उसको छुआ तो वो टोपी के अंदर रोटी छुपा के लेके आई है. एक प्यार का नगमा है, मौजों की रवानी है. क्या खूबसूरत गाना, और क्या वो सब्जेक्ट था उस फिल्म का, शोर का. दिस कैकोफोनी विच वी नाउ, अब तो किसी और ही लेवल, अब पता नहीं मनोज कुमार क्या बनाते, क्योंकि अब शोर का जो हालत है हमारे ज़िंदगी में. पर उस वक्त में वो शोर फिल्म देखिए, आपको डिस्टर्ब करती है कि कैसे वो ही इज अफेक्टेड बाय दिस कैकोफोनी.
I think we are actually short of time, and it's a pity we won't be able to take audience questions. But I just wanted to also touch on something that you mentioned earlier, ways of watching films back then. Now, I assume both of you were, in the 70s as children or as adolescents, you were watching these films on the big screen. And just a few years later, I think by the early 80s, by the mid 80s, the video cassette era comes in. And I know from first-hand experience how viewing patterns changed completely. I think I can probably count on the fingers of both hands the films that I watched on the big screen, after the years after the video cassette era came in. Do you think that also made a big difference to the particular sort of nostalgia we feel? Because it's a larger than life experience, and it's sometimes there's a certain sort of film experience that has to involve being in that magic theater in the dark with a big screen. Is that something that affected
I think
your?
the community viewing experience is completely different. And Sholay, the way he, Ramesh Sippiji introduced stereophone sound and the big 70 it just blew our minds. I mean, it was just amazing to hear, one track with those horses ka hooves that decoyed to the scene, yahan se, and then the tabla plays, and then the Basanti chase thing is happening. It was mind-blowing. I think we've never heard those kind of tracks before. So you just can't experience that on a television screen at home. Although we've all watched these films on VCR later many times. We know हमारे कैसेट घिस जाते थे literally देख के all these films. And parallel cinema we really didn't have access to much because I was too young. I don't know about Vishalji, but we didn't have access to film festivals so much. But we watched all of them on Doordarshan. So we should thank Doordarshan for making these films available to us. Otherwise we wouldn't have watched all the Shyam Benegal greats.
Also, just the process of imagining films. There's something, the essay that I did is actually about the audio cassettes, like, the Vishalji mentioned just now, the Sholay dialogue track, and audio cassettes like that, which I listened to long before I actually got to watch the films. So, so you have this, there's this imagination, there's this sense of larger than lifeness that is also happening. Yeah. That was also a very important part of it.
Absolutely.
What do you think really set the decade apart from the decade that led up to it, the 1960s, and of course the decade that followed, the 1980s, which many of us tend to vilify now? What is special about the 70s in the context of those two?
I think what came out when Vishalji and I were talking, for instance, one, it was this decade of storytelling. Stories were very important. And secondly was violence, because of the degradation all around us and corruption had seeped into public life. I think that reflected a lot. I think this is a recurring theme I'm getting from everybody.
Yeah, and I think one more thing was till 70s was very obvious, is that, a desire to say something deeper, even in commercial cinema. And, to be dignified and, say something more than buzzer. more than the surface. More than the surface. That was really, from 80s, it was the success at any cost. That, and that started from 80s. Till late, even early 80s, 82 तक, ये था कि अच्छी चीज़ देके अपना हमें सक्सेस चाहिए. 80s के बाद आई थिंक हमारी ज़िंदगी में भी यही हुआ कि हम लोग रिफ्लेक्ट कर रहे थे, जो हम लोग एज सोसाइटी थे, कि हमें किसी भी कीमत पे हमारे घर में पैसा आना चाहिए, पड़ोसी का जो होता हो. तो उससे हमारी सोसाइटी का रिफ्लेक्शन सिनेमा था.
Thanks so much to both of you. I think you're going to get more of Vishalji now because he's in the next session as well. But do please look out for the book. You won't regret it. It's every bit as varied as that decade was for cinema. Thanks so much.
It's a jam of a book. There's so much insight in this book.
Thank you.